At this point, I would like to welcome up Amandeep Saini, Hayden McElvaney, Ananya Yadav, and Brooklyn Lanowski to have 30 minutes to complete your delegation. So just come up to the microphones that are on the chairs there. If you're looking for a bit of guidance, as I often was in this room, the little face, there's a little light next to the face if you want to touch the face. When you're done talking, turn your microphone off because there's a certain maximum number of microphones that can be on there at a time, and so you want to make sure that only kind of one of you is talking at a time. Otherwise, you have 30 minutes. I'm going to be pretty strict about timing that because we don't want to take too long on the delegation part because there may be questions for people. Apart from that, you take it away whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, committee members. I want to start by thanking you for giving us the opportunity to be here today. My name is Amandeep. I am a research lead at the McMaster Research Shop, and we're a group that works with local community organizations on research projects that support their work. This year, we were fortunate enough to be invited by Carl Andrus from the Hamilton Community Benefits Network to conduct an environmental scan of social procurement policies in Canadian municipalities, and also talk to local social enterprises in Hamilton to understand what they'd like to see included in a social procurement policy. We've drafted a report that's been shared with you, and we'd like to highlight some of the findings of that report here with you today as well. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the research team that's really spearheaded this work and allow them to introduce themselves.
Hello, committee members. My name is Ananya Yadav, and I'm looking forward to the presentation today.
Hello, my name is Brooklyn, and I'm also looking forward to it today.
I'm Hayden McElvaney. Committee members, thank you so much for being here. Today, we'd like to discuss social procurement and its prospects in Hamilton. With that, we'll dive right into things. I have two requests that the slides be moved forward, right? Okay. The work we're sharing with you today is led by Carl Andrus in the Hamilton Community Benefits Network in partnership with McMaster University's Research Shop. The McMaster Research Shop works with various community organizations to provide simple language answers to research questions about the community. These include working with the Hamilton Community Benefits Network to answer questions about social procurement in Hamilton. Next slide, please. Currently, Hamilton does not have a community social procurement strategy in place, but its interest in the community is growing. This project aimed to investigate social procurement strategies and policies adopted by municipalities comparable to Hamilton, as well as collecting feedback from the Hamilton community on what they would like to see in a Hamilton-based social procurement strategy. To that end, we conducted a jurisdictional scan drawing on reports from various municipalities and academic literature. In addition, we conducted interviews with staff from the City of Toronto and Peel region, and spoke to several social enterprises in Hamilton. Overall, our project focuses on answering the following questions. What are the social procurement policies in jurisdictions comparable to Hamilton? And based on these findings, what are some recommendations to the City of Hamilton in developing and implementing a Hamilton-based social procurement strategy? Next slide, please. Our presentation has three key aspects. First, we will provide an overview on community benefits and social procurement. Second, we will give examples on social procurement in other municipalities comparable to Hamilton. Third, based on our research findings, we will provide recommendations to the City of Hamilton.
Next slide, please. So what are community benefits? Community benefits are environmental, economic, or social outcomes that municipalities and/or private businesses commit to delivering communities through development projects or business activities. Community benefits aim to provide wider socioeconomic value to residents while helping to mitigate the negative impacts of economic activity, such as driving employment or income disparities. Accordingly, community benefits aim to prioritize the interests of equity-deserving groups who have otherwise been marginalized or excluded from such processes. Next slide, please. Community benefits aim to respond to specific needs. Therefore, types of community benefits vary depending on a specific community or project's unique needs. Community benefits can be social, for example, through more inclusive employment opportunities. Hamilton's Threshold School of Building runs programs such as co-ops connecting at-risk youth to the local construction industry. Relatedly, community benefits can be considered economically in terms of a strengthened local workforce. The Toronto-Eglinton Crosstown LRT project included a commitment to employing historically disadvantaged groups for at least 10% of all trade working hours required for construction, as well as a commitment to hiring at least 50 skilled newcomers to Canada. Finally, community benefits can be considered in terms of increased environmental commitments, such as the City of Winnipeg's transition to a zero-emission bus fleet by the year of 2050. Next slide, please. Community benefits often take the form of community benefit agreements, or CBAs. CBAs are legally binding documents outlining specific programmatic and material commitments to community benefits. CBAs help ensure transparent and inclusive infrastructure development projects, and they have been associated with numerous benefits, such as a strengthened local workforce, enhanced project planning, and mitigation of community issues. The research shop has conducted work on CBAs in the past, and on the slide here is a picture of a report from 2019, also conducted on behalf of the Hamilton Community Benefits Network. And this past report conducted a case study of various different kinds of CBAs in order to help form recommendations for best practices for CBAs. So you can check that out on the McMaster's Office for Community Engagement website, or McMaster OCE. Next slide, please. So CBAs originated in the late 1990s United States. At the time, local developments believed that the faster developments could proceed, the faster rehabilitation could be achieved. Thus, cities and states began granting large public subsidies and tax exemptions to such developments. This resulted in an increasing trend of public support for developments. And over time, amongst these supporters, leaders began to emerge who went on to form the very first community coalitions in order to negotiate community benefits to ensure that equity returning to downtown cores ended up in the hands of those who needed it most. So while CBAs first originated in the United States, Canada has since followed suit. Vancouver was the first to introduce a CBA in 2005, and now all levels of government in Canada are either in the process of exploring, creating, or have already adopted standard policies for CBAs. Next slide, please.
So we wanted to start with that context on community benefits and community benefits agreements to set a foundation, recognizing that social procurement is considered a type of community benefit and is often integrated into community benefits agreements today, in addition to being implemented in standalone policy across municipalities. Many of you might already be familiar with the social procurement and procurement in general, but just to ensure we're all on the same page, procurement is the process of purchasing and acquiring goods and services from external sources or vendors for organizational activity, like here in the city. And social procurement leverages that purchasing power to achieve social, economic, cultural, and environmental goals, and really encourages considerations of values like diversity and sustainability in the selection of vendors to advance these goals. Next slide, please. So social procurement can have several goals, and these can all be integrated into policies. So these are some examples of goals that social procurement policies that we examined had. One is supply chain diversity, so looking at including vendors from both small, medium, and large size organizations, or including vendors that are run by individuals from equity-seeking backgrounds. On a similar note, promoting Indigenous inclusion, as well as environmental sustainability and supporting social enterprise.
In our report, we analyzed several municipal social procurement strategies. Today, we'd like to highlight two cases, Toronto and Vancouver. We chose these cases because of how comprehensive they are, but also because of how distinct they are, highlighting the various approaches that have been taken to social procurement. Next slide, please. Toronto first implemented its social procurement strategy in March 2016. It's comprised of two key elements: the social procurement policy and the tools, guides, and support system that guide that policy. First, Toronto maintains a list of diverse suppliers defined as organizations that are 51% controlled, owned, or managed by equity-seeking communities or social purpose enterprises. Divisional purchase orders between $3,000 and $100,000 require a quotation from at least one diverse supplier. Bidders who want to enter into contracts with the City of Toronto are strongly encouraged to develop their own diverse supply lines. When competition between projects is estimated with an estimated value of $5 billion or more, the City prioritizes projects that maximize workforce development opportunities. Workforce development opportunities are based on the principles of suitability, reach, volume, and feasibility. Projects that maximize these key four principles are prioritized. In addition, Toronto continuously collects data on its social procurement policy to make adjustments where needed. The City constantly works with community stakeholders to eliminate barriers to entry, such as amending the exclusive definition of diverse suppliers. The City maintains a basic list of templates, contract language, and guidelines to help standardize its program. Next slide, please. Alternatively, Vancouver's community benefits policy was adopted in 2005 and amended in 2018. It follows a 10-10-10 rule. 10% of all jobs in development projects must be filled by Vancouver residents and equity-seeking groups, with priority given to entry-level workers. 10% of all materials, goods, and services required for a development project must be sourced from Vancouver-based businesses. 10% of all materials, goods, and services for a development project must be sourced from equity-seeking or social good certified businesses.
Next slide, please. So now that we've gone over two of our main case study examples, we will be getting into the recommendations that we have come up for establishing a social procurement policy in Hamilton. Our report outlines 16 recommendations, which we have condensed into 11 for this presentation. Next slide, please. So our first recommendation is about championing social procurement through pilot projects, and this involves first testing initiatives through prototyping multiple one-time small-scale pilots to test community employment benefits, community benefits agreements, and different types of social procurement initiatives within the context of Hamilton. These pilots will help determine what practices align best with the city's current policy process, as well as identify areas of improvement that need to be addressed within the city's program systems, processes, and infrastructure. The learnings from these pilots then come together to inform and shape a tailored social procurement policy for the City of Hamilton. While introducing and implementing these pilots, it's important to show a strong commitment to advocate for the social procurement movement internally at the City of Hamilton, really underscoring the significance of social responsibility in procurement practices, and acknowledging the need for a work culture within the city that wholeheartedly embraces the concept of social procurement. And hand in hand, it is vital that city departments are also committed to engaging externally with diverse stakeholders. So that is social enterprises, various diverse businesses that are in the community for a successful implementation of the social procurement process, both internally and externally within the city. Next slide, please. The second recommendation is to establish specialized roles and positions. So based on our findings, we recommend creating dedicated full-time and part-time roles to oversee social procurement. This can include full-time coordinator roles and part-time support roles that are tasked with overseeing and enhancing social procurement initiatives. This is imperative to ensure that there is a commitment to embed social procurement practices within the city and to make sure that it is implemented in an efficient manner. So an example of this from the City of Brampton. Within their social procurement plan, their long-term social procurement plan, within 3 to 5 years, the City of Brampton plans to approve and create a dedicated sustainable procurement office, and this office will play a pivotal role in coordinating, administering, and managing the implementation of existing and future policies, solidifying the city's sustained commitment to socially responsible and sustainable procurement practices.
Next slide, please. Our third recommendation is to engage meaningfully with stakeholders by hosting educational conferences, social procurement conference, as well as ensuring continuous follow-up with stakeholders. Understandings of community here should include stakeholders, target groups, as well as the broader communities. And it's also important to note that social enterprises in Hamilton will play indispensable roles in the creation and functioning of a social procurement policy in Hamilton, as these organizations have firsthand experiences that they have gained through their own personal experiences or shared through working amongst clientele. They're aware of the most pressing issues facing our community, as well as the challenges they have faced in attempts to address those issues. So we really want to make sure that their voices are being heard throughout this process. When providing education, we want to ensure that attendees at conferences have access to educational material beforehand so that they are prepared. Many organizations may be unaware of certain criteria or how to meet that criteria, so we want to make sure that we're providing them with the opportunities to meaningfully engage. And such a conference would provide the opportunity for a robust network of social enterprises to come together across the community to help form that network that is needed for an effective policy. And finally, ensuring continuous follow-up helps address the issue of erosion of trust, as some interviewees expressed doubt in participating in such a pilot project due to past efforts that they felt didn't see intended results. And it's also important to note that many of these organizations may be strained for resources, so when they do put the time and effort in, we just really want to make sure that they feel as though their voice is being heard. Next slide, please. And an example of this is the City of Toronto's 51% ownership threshold for what defines a diverse business has proven to be a bit challenging in the past for different unique circumstances. For example, businesses may have multiple owners where only one owner comes from a diverse background. So in order to help address this issue, they host community consultations so that they can continuously update the definition of a diverse supplier. Next slide, please. And our fourth recommendation is to integrate social procurement goals into a policy in the way that social procurement is centered in the policy rather than being an afterthought. This advice comes from municipal staff that we spoke to at the City of Toronto and Peel region, who emphasized that without being clear and transparent about our goals, it can become very difficult to achieve social procurement once developments are already underway. Therefore, it needs to be clear from the very start of the planning of the social procurement process to staff, potential vendors, as well as the broader community that we intend to apply a social procurement lens to it. Additionally, if there are any specific goals we wish to achieve, these also need to be made clear during the strategic planning process. And an example of this is the City of Edmonton, as they plan to apply an Indigenous Sustainable Communities framework in order to address barriers and help increase Indigenous participation in social procurement practices. Next slide, please.
We recommend that the City of Hamilton work with different social enterprises in the city to meet their diverse needs. For example, small Hamilton social enterprises such as 541 Eatery face challenges with traditional finance models. A Hamilton social procurement policy should identify the specific needs and challenges of various social enterprises in the city. Further, the city can provide resources that empower social enterprises to overcome identified obstacles. Next slide, please. In addition, the city should examine social procurement policies adopted by other municipalities. This would not only provide the City of Hamilton with a foundation to build its own social procurement policy on, but allow the city to harmonize its policy and strategy with neighboring municipalities. For example, when the Peel region adopted its social procurement strategy, it took inspiration from Brampton and Toronto. Pre-existing municipal social procurement policies provide a foundation for the City of Hamilton to develop, implement, and harmonize its own policy. This would involve analyzing existing social procurement policy and guidelines and trade agreements to identify what would work and not work in a Hamilton context. Next slide, please.
Our next recommendation is around implementing inclusive supplier engagement and defining diverse suppliers. So when developing a framework or social procurement framework for the City of Hamilton, it is important to, one, develop and implement strategies to engage a diverse range of small and medium businesses and suppliers. Two, set inclusion goals for Indigenous, Black, and other equity-deserving suppliers. And three, implement lower value contracts to facilitate participation by smaller suppliers, avoiding consolidation into larger contracts. And you will have heard throughout our presentation that we've been using the term diverse supplier a lot. And to ensure that everyone is on the same page, it is important to engage the community in developing a shared definition of diverse supplier to ensure inclusivity and leaving room for flexibility as perceptions of identity evolve over time. The city must be open to revisiting this definition and updating vendor lists accordingly. As mentioned earlier, the City of Toronto defines diverse suppliers as businesses with 51% or more ownership by an equity-seeking group. And since 2016, Toronto's social procurement program has also awarded $4.5 million in city contracts to diverse businesses. One of their criteria for being a diverse business is that the business must be recognized by the 5 councils listed up on the slide there. An example of them being the Canadian Aboriginal and Minority Supplier Council or the Women Business Enterprises of Canada. Next slide, please. Another example we have from the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo. Over there, they prioritize procurement from Indigenous businesses with 51% or more Indigenous ownership, and this is for purchases under $10,000. An important thing to consider to have a diversified supplier base is to be committed to constantly revisiting the definition of diverse suppliers and to seek out underrepresented businesses. And some features could include microloans for small new businesses, including smaller projects in procurement efforts, and simplifying public bylaws for easier startup access. Next slide, please. And our next recommendation is around having a publicly accessible directory of social enterprises. And based on our findings, we recommend that the city create a comprehensive and publicly accessible directory of social enterprises. This will enable enterprises to connect with each other and streamline interactions with potential purchasers. Throughout many of our interviews with social enterprises as well as municipalities, they emphasize the importance of making sure that the directory list is inclusive and encompasses small startups as well as established charities, and really making sure that that large range is addressed and ensuring representation of diverse social enterprises within that range. They also emphasize that the list, along with the city's procurement activity, should be disclosed publicly, and that there must be a commitment to conduct a thorough environmental scan to identify potential participants beyond just labeled social enterprises. And this, once again, is adding to the commitment to diverse suppliers. And an example we have from the city of Winnipeg, where they have a planned supplier registry initiative. Their supplier registry includes data on social enterprises, Indigenous businesses, and other diverse businesses, and it essentially aims to centralize procurement information. They also have a sustainable procurement landing page, which provides program details and engagement opportunities, and it's publicly open to all, and it enhances accessibility for all stakeholders involved. Next slide, please.
Our next recommendation is to develop a training and resource hub. We've heard from both municipal staff and local social enterprises that social procurement policies can be complex and difficult to navigate and participate in, especially if you don't have access to information about how to fully participate. So for example, not everybody might know what constitutes a strong project proposal or project bid, and that can disadvantage certain vendors. So to address that, we recommend developing a training and resource hub that gives people the opportunity to access the same information as well as knowledge and skills to fully participate in that social procurement policy or program. Next slide. On a similar note, we also recommend supporting social enterprises and certification processes. As we've alluded to earlier in the presentation, many municipalities require that social enterprises or businesses, vendors that are participating in social procurement programs obtain certification as diverse suppliers to be recognized as such through third parties who offer that kind of certification like BiSocial Canada. And if this is a requirement, we would encourage the city to provide individuals and businesses with information on how to obtain that certification, so the processes and requirements that are involved specifically for the City of Hamilton. Next slide. Our final recommendation is to ensure transparent measurement and evaluation processes. So we want to set up an evaluation and measurement framework to understand both what's working well within our social procurement policy or program, as well as any pilots that we do, but also what is not working well and what needs to be improved. We also recommend making the results of these evaluations public on a consistent basis, and this has several benefits. One is from a community engagement perspective, allowing the community to understand and share in the successes of what's going well with the program, but also create a commitment to improving identified areas of improvement and creating timelines and processes to address those areas of feedback in a timely manner. Next slide. Just wanted to mention here the City of Toronto as an example of a municipality that has a relatively well-developed tracking and evaluation framework, looking specifically at aiming to reduce barriers to participation in the social procurement program, as well as tracking procurement directed to diverse suppliers. Next slide. So as we conclude, I want to leave you with 3 important points. One is that social procurement is a way for the city to advance its social, economic, cultural, and environmental goals. Second is that procurement and social procurement is a big undertaking, but it's not something that we have to jump into all at once, and we think it might actually be better to start with small-scale one-off pilots to understand what works best in our context, as well as how we can adapt our existing infrastructure to support larger social procurement programs and policies. And then finally, while in this project we did aim to engage local social enterprises, we do recommend that the city engage in further consultations, understanding the time limitations and resource limitations of this project. It can be used as a starting point, but we do recommend that the city do further consultation both before the development of a policy and pilots, but also during and after as well, to see what improvements can be made. And with that, I'd like to conclude the presentation, and we're happy to take any comments or questions.
Thanks, with 2 minutes to spare. I'll now entertain any questions from folks here. Just want to say if anyone's wanting to make motions with respect to the presentation, we'll wait till we actually receive the delegation, and then we can do that right afterwards. I know that oftentimes when there's presentations, people want to say, hey, can staff go away and look at these recommendations or whatever, so I anticipate that may occur, just flagging the roadmap. Any questions for the presenters from anyone on the committee? Okay, I'll see Councillor Maureen Wilson and then Member Nikolskaya, and we'll start with you, Councillor Maureen Wilson. Go for it.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to, first of all, express my gratitude and congratulations for the excellence that you've brought to this table and the thoroughness of your work. So thank you very, very much. I think I just have 2 questions to start off with. And it's, you've emphasized a few times the importance of starting small, so pilots. And I'm wondering if you could just expand on that a little bit more, that tension of, just a little bit of background for you. I'm looking at it from the perspective of what we did to affect urban design on our streets in Hamilton. We started out with something called tactical urbanism, which was actually residents making slight changes in their neighborhood to see how it impacted or affected and improved safety. And then that went on to affect eventually corporate policy. And that tension between the need for policy framework, but the need to have the courage to move first with piloting. So I'm wondering if you could just speak to that chicken and egg thing a little bit more for me, please.
So I think the reason why from our research findings we've recommended starting with small one-time pilots is because implementing a policy all at once can seem incredibly overwhelming, and it'll be difficult to get buy-in from either community members or internally within the city as well. So I think it's important to sort of through small one-time pilots, essentially work towards creating a cultural shift within the city, and also work towards educating the larger community about what social procurement is. I think in one of our interviews with the region of Peel, what they had mentioned is that they had started their social procurement efforts prior to COVID, but when COVID hit, for example, everything sort of was dismantled, and it was really difficult for them to get back on track, especially within a decentralized system, to get buy-in from various departments within their municipality. So I think the power in small one-time pilots is it can, one, give the city an opportunity to really track where the successes are, and also track what areas of improvement there are, and then build upon that rather than having a large project from the onset, which comes with larger costs as well and could then lead to lesser buy-in. It's through the constant learnings of small pilots, I think, that there could be a better established framework within the city.
So thank you. If I could just dive a little bit or drill a little bit further into that. So agreed, understand starting small for a whole bunch of reasons, but just making sure I fully understand. There's this expression: listen, try, really do. Right. So, what is the role of the municipality in ensuring it's working in good faith? And listening with community partners in first establishing who establishes those first parameters that inform that pilot? Through the chair.
So I think, so that is part of our recommendations, is the role of the municipality essentially is setting the guidelines and creating the framework, but that is not to say that the city is the one that's just setting all the rules and policies in place, and it doesn't come without extensive community consultation. I think that's incredibly important. There's no value in a social procurement framework for the city if it's not actually meeting the needs of the small and medium-sized businesses that would be a part of this policy, as well as social enterprises. So I think the pilots allow for more unique one-on-one consultations with the related stakeholders for implementing a larger strategy at the later end.
Thank you for really underscoring the clarity of that for me. My last question is, I know you spoke about the importance of identifying a directory of social enterprise, but you did reference one in your presentation, an eatery along Barton. During your work, did you identify any more in Hamilton? Like, could you give me a range of magnitude? And thank you. Those are my questions for now.
Councillor, could you perhaps repeat the question?
Sure thing. You identified in your presentation an example of a social enterprise, an eatery along Barton Street. You also recommended that we do the work to inventory those which exist at present. I'm just wondering, maybe to help us in that work, if you identified some during the course of your work. Thank you.
Yeah, so we consulted a number of social enterprises, 541 Eatery as an example, but also New Hope Bikes, the Threshold School of Building, the Welcome Inn Community Center, and Wesley. So those were the 5 that we engaged in this that you can sort of build on. The other thing I might add to this as a side note is a point about, and this comes from our interviewees, a point about how not all organizations that we might see as social enterprises or want to engage with might necessarily define themselves that way. So sort of clarifying that to the community as well.
Thanks, Member Nichols-Kaya, and then Councillor Huang.
And before I ask my questions, Chair, I rely on you. I also have 4 questions, so remind me when I need to add myself back to the end of the list. Through you, Chair, as Councillor Maureen Wilson had stated, excellent presentation. Thank you so much for your diligent work. My first question goes to an example that was mentioned. It's noted in the official report on page 4, but it was about how one of the examples stated that they were able to have as part of their successes 50 newcomers as part of the workforce, and that's an excellent notation. My question around that is about if you found that these examples also provided further intersectionality, as oftentimes these amalgamated statistics do cover and not necessarily highlight some of those elements. For example, newcomers from the UK and Ukraine don't face the same barriers as racialized newcomers. So when I see 50 newcomers, it doesn't tell me as much as I would like. Did you find a discussion about intersectionality in some of these statistics in the way that social procurement efforts demonstrated their successes?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. That's an excellent question, and it actually did come up in the interview process when we interviewed staff from the City of Toronto. So, as mentioned in the presentation, the City of Toronto maintains what they call a list of diverse suppliers, but part of the issue is that identities and what may constitute a diverse supplier changes over time. So, an example that they cited in that interview is you may have a social enterprise that has 2 owners. And so if one is an equity-seeking person, but one isn't, that falls short of the 51% plus definition and criteria. And so what the City of Toronto did to kind of work within that definition is they actually consulted with community members on what may constitute a diverse supplier. And so instead of having kind of like an itemized list of criteria, they're working towards developing a policy that allows community members to identify as a diverse supplier.
I appreciate that. I guess as a follow-up to that, outside of just the composition of the suppliers, did you find that when any of these interviews were discussing how they measured success within the statistics of the community members that they were able to reach out to, was there a discussion about intersectionality insofar as women, for example, or racialized persons?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think to that end, part of the issue too is with a broad definition of diverse supplier, there is kind of that lack of intersectionality, but we do know that certain groups, because of what you might call double, triple, or quadruple jeopardy, don't have the same access to city contracts as other groups. And so part of the process of developing a strong social procurement policy is recognizing that there are certain communities, certain groups that may have more power within that process, may have more access to that process, and really trying to identify where definitions fall short and where the actual logistics of working with those groups try to accommodate the different needs and barriers that different groups experience, such as women, immigrants, LGBTQ+.
And just to add to that, in some of the interviews that we had with folks, what they mentioned is essentially that currently there's really just a lack of information around what social enterprises might exist within the city already. So I think their first priority, so to say, is to really identify, which is one of the recommendations, is really have a large environmental scan to then from there work towards how can the city best meet these needs and redefine the definition of diverse suppliers, which is a constant practice.
Just to add on one more point, sorry. I think also what I found many interviewees stress was the importance of education when it comes to that. So considering that different people may come from different backgrounds, they may have different access to how to, like Amondeep had mentioned, how to submit a good proposal or how to submit a strong proposal. So I think when considering different backgrounds, it's really important that we don't overlook anything with education and don't assume that any different groups or organizations know something that may seem like it might be obvious to one person, it may not be so obvious to the next. So we just really want to ensure a good training and education hub can really help a lot with that.
Thank you so much for that extra clarity. And through you, Chair, my next question is about a particular recommendation that you have in the report. It's numbered differently than in the presentation, but it's recommendation number 10. It's outstanding. It's the one about ensuring that we are careful and that we do an extensive amount of work when we are defining equity-seeking and equity-deserving communities, as there isn't a universal definition. I really appreciated the highlight of the fluidity of that. I want to connect it to the other report that was prepared by others at the research shop. And in their literature review, as part of the very first best practices, it's noted on page 21, it acknowledges a group and calls it recognizable disability. And I was taken a little bit aback by that, because that can mean quite a bit, and the nuance of that is, and someone is recognizing that as opposed to self-identified. And given that it's noted as a best practice, I'm wondering if the four of you have any responses to that or anything to add to that, so that when other city staff are preparing the educational pieces, preparing these policies, they think really critically about the language that's used. So any responses or reactions to the term recognizable disability?
I think my response to this, and this is not something that we've necessarily explored in our project, but understanding that, of course, people's own experiences might shape how they define disability that the rest of us may not understand. And so it's important to be open and listen to individuals, invite them to a table, and really actively listen to how they are identifying themselves, and really try to center that in our definitions. I think it again ties to this idea that we need to be open to sort of crowdsourcing community definitions of what diverse means, and also understanding that those definitions also change over time. And like I said, because we all have different experiences, we're going to have different ideas to add to, what we need to consider in order to understand and build a comprehensive understanding of what diversity is. And so I would lean more towards the self-identification route.
Also, just to add on a point that, although I think in terms of recognizable disability, it's important to remember that depending on a different individual's background, they may face certain challenges when it comes to healthcare, whether it's regarding access or even just comfortability with healthcare. Different people may have different levels of comfortability in seeking a diagnosis. So again, yeah, really emphasizing that personal lived experiences is going to be really important when listening to people's opinions about community benefits. And people may have very valuable experiences to share, even if they do lack something such as a certain diagnosis. It does not negate their lived experiences.
Through you, Chair, I'm so appreciative of those two additional pieces of clarification for the record. Thank you so much for adding those two. And my last question for now is, I started this questionnaire talking about the example from Toronto, switching to the example about Vancouver, where all of their metrics are about a 10% sort of a quota, so to speak. In my mind, my initial reaction is, why so low? But could you respond or add some clarification about what you found in terms of quotas, like statistics? Did you find that there were other examples that ranged higher? Were they typically that low and not as ambitious as the ambitious city perhaps might explore in the future?
Yeah, with Vancouver, their policy is very broad in that it's applicable to workforce development overall, whereas a city like Toronto, for example, is very vertical in their approach. And so because of that different approach that was taken, you might see Toronto on one hand have a little bit more strict criteria, whereas Vancouver is very broad within their 10% rule. As for why that was ultimately chosen, that would probably require picking into the minds of policymakers at that time. If I had to suggest based on our research, it was probably because being too ambitious with social procurement policies has often resulted in the failure of those policies. And so going back to what was mentioned earlier, it often requires developing a framework and then working within that framework over time to develop a more solidified and ambitious policy. But I do agree with you on that end that 10% is pretty low, especially for a city as like Vancouver.
Thank you very much. And now we're on to Councillor Huang, then Member Andrus. I'm trying to keep this conversation and presentation to an hour. I didn't say that in advance, so if we can try and wrap our questions up, that'd be great. If the meeting goes 3:45, I've got to leave and I'll hand the chair over to you, Vice Chair Andrus, if I have to go at that time. Councillor Huang.
Thank you. I know that Violetta's kind of asked a lot of amazing questions, so it's really hard to follow up after her line of questioning. So mine are perhaps not as in-depth as what Violetta's asking, but I'd like to understand a little bit more about the Buy Social Canada, because you brought that up as one of your recommendations. That sounds as though it is tapping into a potential ecosystem or a network. Could you provide a little more information? Of the sort of comparator municipalities that you looked at, how many of them were also in that network?
So Buy Social Canada is an organization that does work around education around social procurement. They also do work with municipalities to advise them on approaches to social procurement. And then also do offer certification supports to vendors. They're sort of highlighted as an example of a group that can offer certification and maybe has some resources around community education that can be leveraged, but it's certainly not something that the City of Hamilton needs to go with. There are many approaches or many organizations, for example, outside of Buy Social Canada as well, that recognize diverse suppliers or fulfill the other functions that Buy Social Canada does. We found that in our work they were a helpful resource, but certainly not necessarily an endorsement of that specific organization.
Excellent, thank you. So perhaps as follow-up then through you, chairs, I'm glad you brought that up because there are other organizations like B Labs and B Corps, and they all do some level of social procurement, but not necessarily the same level as like certifications or anything like that. So I was really curious as to why you highlighted specifically that one, and it felt like it was a new one that I hadn't actually seen before. in your research and in your environmental scan, how much did our current policies and our current procurement procedures factor into your recommendations? Mostly because I do see that we already have a fair wage policy. We have, we are rejigging in terms of like how we're doing procurement. So how much of that was factored into your research, and how much of that was influencing your recommendations to us today?
Yeah, we recognize that there's already a lot of work that's been done on this front, and we really want to highlight that the processes and policies that we're recommending be developed build on what already exists, and recognize the City of Hamilton's existing goals, like around fair wages or healthy and safe communities. We think that the groundwork is already there, and a social procurement policy is going to bring it together and tie it up to sort of really ensure that it's front and center in our procurement processes, and it's clear to our vendors as well as other stakeholders that that's something we prioritize. But certainly, as you mentioned, there's a lot of existing frameworks and groundworks already here.
Okay, thank you. My last question then is, as it relates to the education and the training aspect of it, because I do note that when I look at other municipalities and their social procurement policies, they do not actually include that aspect of that, bringing them along, sharing with them, and essentially that idea of like that certification, or providing them with some of those educational pieces around bids or anything like that. So it's above and beyond. So I really appreciate that you are trying to think of it from a holistic perspective. I'm just questioning that it is part of, like, it's inside of the suite of essentially the first phase of this. And it feels as though that might be a phase 3 or a phase 4 later on down the road. So why did you make that decision to put it so early on in this particular process?
I think one of the things that came across in our interviews with folks was this exact thing that you've highlighted, is the struggle for city staff, for example, to do this like on the side of their desks, which is why I think if we're thinking about a social procurement policy in Hamilton, it's better to think about that larger aspect of it from the get-go, understanding that there will be time constraints on the city staff level themselves, which is one of our recommendations, is having established roles for this work. Also because oftentimes in a decentralized system, you need certain people that are pushing this work forward, and it's not adding on to their existing work. So I think the importance of having it in mind from the get-go is to ensure that those things can be addressed more adequately.
Thank you. I really appreciate that answer. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. And Member Andrus, and then to Councillor Tattison.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about some of the concerns or hesitancy in social enterprises on exploring social procurement. Can you unpack that a little bit in terms of what maybe as both a committee and as the city that we can do to re-engage them and to perhaps revalidate that social procurement is something we're serious about?
Sorry, can you just repeat? I missed the first half of your question.
Yeah, so I'm very curious about how you mentioned in your presentation that some social enterprises are a little bit hesitant about pursuing this and participating in some kind of engagement. So I'm wondering what your recommendations might be around re-engaging those social enterprises, and also providing them with the reassurance that they're not wasting their time again on committing to this process or participating.
Yeah, so I think in some of our interviews with the social enterprises, that was a concern identified by them of they don't want to be looped into a process where they're sort of left halfway in the middle. And so part of our recommendation around hosting engagement events like a conference, essentially to get a network of social enterprises within the city itself connected, so they themselves can be empowered through being connected through a network, but also having a voice together to speak in relation to the city. But I think that is why we've consistently emphasize the need for constant community consultation throughout all our recommendations. That is a key voice, and without that and without shifting definitions on a consistent basis, this work is very difficult to achieve. And so any social procurement policy in Hamilton needs to be centered around social enterprises and diverse small and medium businesses that will be a part of this policy.
And if I could quickly add to that answer as well, I think a key thing that we've heard from social enterprises is the piece about follow-through. People have engaged in consultations before and have come together before, but what they didn't see was the results of that consultation. And I think people are quite aware that these processes, building policies, programs, even pilots, take a lot of time, work, and effort. They're not going to see results the next day, but they do want to, I think, see plans for follow-through. And I think part of that just goes back to best practices for community engagement as well. When thinking about engaging with particular groups, going back to them and updating them on how has that information been used a couple weeks to months later, what has it resulted in, and providing sort of updates on the process, I think can be really helpful in reestablishing that trust.
Thank you very much for the answer, and I also want to thank you, although I've thanked you guys a bunch for this hard work that you guys have all done. I really appreciate it. I know we went over time in terms of the semester that it was supposed to happen in, and I really appreciate this report and the work that you have all done for this. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Taddison.
So thanks for your presentation. Very informative. So obviously we're working on our community benefits plan here in Hamilton, and we're exploring, and you know, we have lots of diversity in Hamilton, so I'm hoping that that can help. You guys, in your presentation, mentioned that there's a cultural shift that needs to happen. So again, you needed to go outside, look at other jurisdictions to see what they had done. I'm just kind of wondering, where did those other jurisdictions, where did they find the necessary momentum to make that cultural shift? Like, was it public grassroots? Was it city staff? Was it a willing council, municipality will, or was it like, again, was it a champion councillor or social? What got them along the way?
So I can speak to an interview I did with the Region of Peel where we asked them this exact question of who's really helping champion this within the city. One, I think what they mentioned is it is a concerted effort. It's not just a city. There is community advocacy that comes along with it. But I think something that they identified is it is difficult to have people that are championing this within a decentralized municipal system. There are some departments within cities that are really keen to this work and really committing to it, whereas certain departments within the city might not even know what social procurement is, what all goes into it. So I think for the most part, at least in the interviews we've spoken to with municipal staff, it is staff that are dedicated to this, that have been pushing the needle forward in this within their respective municipalities.
Thanks. I think that's an insightful answer that we need to reflect on as we move forward. So I appreciate that answer. No more questions, and thanks again.
Thanks so much, everyone, and thanks so very much for your presentation today. That exhausts our questions for you. At this point, you can return to your seats and hang out if you wish to. Otherwise, thanks for your presentation. Can I please have a mover and seconder to receive the delegation? Moved by Member Andrus and seconded by Member Nikolskaya. All those in favor of receiving the delegation? Mark? That's everybody. And at this point, if there's anything related to this specific presentation in terms of motions people wanted to move, this would be the moment to do so. Yeah, I see indication from Councillor Maureen Wilson.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Chair. I know we have a presentation from Tina, but obviously I'm very interested in the notion of a pilot but I do think I have some larger corporate questions, such as ownership of community benefits corporately around the table. So while I appreciate your direction on this, I would like us to give considerable and significant thought to pursuing a pilot. But I need to know corporately how we are equipped to do so. So that's kind of my dilemma at this time. I look for you
Sure.
for guidance.
No problem. This committee reports directly to GIC, the General Issues Committee, so certainly we could wait and do something. Whether we were to go to the scope of a pilot or not, it doesn't need to be a decision we can make today. We could certainly have staff report back on some of the things that happened today, but there could be an intermediary step, including reporting back on that answer to that question, because I think that's going to plague us for a while here as on this committee is we don't necessarily have like a community benefits department at the City of Hamilton. So this work is being done by folks from various different parts of the city, and there's not one person who's necessarily tasked with dealing with all these things, though I'd imagine procurement is different. That's my best answer. Go ahead, and I'll turn to Member Andrews. Yeah.
So along that vein, I'd like to, rather than just the recommendations of the communications to be received, to be referred to staff, perhaps for consideration, especially around things they're already doing. I know the City of Hamilton is already doing some social procurement just in their purchasing practices in various departments. So with the will of the committee, I'd like to not just receive these, but maybe refer them to staff for a report back.
Before we get to that, I just wanted to let Councillor Wilson finish her thought. Then I'll come to you after that. Go ahead, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Just kind of along those lines, I think you prefaced your comments by, like, we've been here, right, for a while. And to be fair to staff, I think a pilot would be such that it would enable there to, we would engender some sense of ownership and perhaps a collectivity of staff to be able to focus on something. So further to Member Andrus's point, could we, rather than just receive, could we request that the presentation be sent to the to staff, and I'll leave it who will it go to, that's the dilemma, right? For review and a report back on how we would move forward with a pilot. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got a few of these things I can summarize quickly. Don't worry. I understand where this is headed. Before we get there, I'll go to the Director of Procurement, Director Iacco.
Through the chair, thank you. I would like the subcommittee to not lose sight that we have another report coming. We were not able to bring that report today due to the cyber event because a lot of the information was on the drives. So this report is coming, and I'm thinking that with that report, we'll have a better idea of how we move forward potentially, whether it's with a pilot, or determining what kind of pilot that is, or if we're moving forward with policy and further interaction or community engagement. But I think it's important that you see that report as well. Maybe perhaps we make any decision just yet.
So if I understand the will of the committee, what I'm sensing is that what people would like to have happen is that they'd like staff to take these recommendations back and come back with a report back, discussing, what we can do here, what we can't do here, what will work, like that kind of stuff. I know you may be doing part of that work in a future report, but I think the ask is, let's look at these 16 recommendations in this report and give some kind of response back on that. So that's generally speaking where I think this is going, and that would be a direction to refer the report to staff to report back on the recommendations by X date, right? And I know we have a mover and seconder in that already, I think. Is that captured, generally speaking, where we're at? And then, of course, we can make decisions in line with when the other reports come forward. Those are separate matters about a pilot specifically, or about other kinds of things that are happening. I'm not sure if timing-wise you can integrate your report back for recommendations at the same time as the future report comes back. That might be a timely activity, meaning you can integrate that into a revised report. So I'm going to ask you what you think makes sense here from a timing perspective before we kind of actually provide any direction. Director Iacco, if you have a sense of what's possible.
Through the chair. That's really unknown for us at this point in time, particularly with procurements just starting with to implement the reorganization. And with that, we're looking to hire later this summer special projects, SPM. And some of that responsibility for that individual will be looking at social procurement. We could try possibly quarter 4 for something to come back of this year. Okay. I'm not sure about your report.
Could that include, through the chair, analysis of communication items 5.1, 5.2, as well as the delegation 6.1?
Just a moment. Yeah, I think those are just different, like there's slightly different tasks here, right? So I think if you want to do those kinds of things, we have to break those out, meaning that one is broadly about community benefits agreements. The other one is more about social procurement. I think if the ask is to have these recommendations reviewed by staff and have a report back, that's an important activity to do. And so I think that's got to be a discrete activity. And if the director's saying, hey, we can shoot for Q4, that's a motion. I think that's a tangible motion. I'm just looking to Councillor Maureen Wilson, if that seems fine to you. Or are you having something else in mind that you were trying to get at here?
No, I appreciate that. Obviously, my objective, and I think by the tenor of my colleagues, it's shared that we would like to move forward, and knowing that we know things are underway. My apologies, I wasn't aware that you had another report baked and ready to come out of the Easy Bake Oven. So I don't know the content of that report, so I don't know the relationship between that which is, I think, being asked today and that which it sounds like it's ready to be delivered. So I don't know, I don't know what it is about. So I don't know, I'm not sure why, forgive me, I'm not sure why this request would be an impediment to your work or would be in addition to or subsequent to?
Sure, thanks for the question. So,
and I'm sorry, I don't know.
I apologize. I'm Brianne Gasho, Project Manager in Strategic Initiatives in Healthy and Safe Communities. And I've been working with Director Carrie Brooks-Joyner, who's the staff person on this committee as well, to look into community benefits and social value procurement for the City of Hamilton. So I would say the work that I've been doing and the research that I've been undertaking for about five months before things went awry, is somewhat in line with what we heard today, right? Doing a comprehensive jurisdictional scan, an environmental scan, looking at over a dozen municipalities and their programs, their social value procurement programs, their community benefits programs, whether those are different or whether they're the same thing, and literature review, et cetera. So I would say very much similar focus of my research and the report to bring forward on this. And looking at how we actually might implement this, in Hamilton with a little bit of that staff perspective of what could we do and how might we work through implementing social procurement in Hamilton. And I've worked quite closely with, again, procurement on this as well, looking at current policy, looking at our limitations and the ways in which we might be able to achieve this. So that all of that information is very much tied up in the server. So I'm, in order to bring that forward, I really want that comprehensive research and work that I've done. Once that's back, we'll be able to share.
So that's, through the chair, really, really promising. So if I might suggest, it sounds like these two initiatives are very complementary. And maybe, I'm not sure, obviously I don't know where you've landed on your report, with how much daylight there is between the two, but it's, forgive me, but it sounds like the next step would be, as a consequence of your report anyway, you would be landing on, okay, how can we take off? How can we activate? So I think the recommendation is still such that we would take this information and have that further inform your work. And then, if I may be so bold, if I'm understanding what your work is, that you would be concluding with action steps of how we would go about maybe piloting. Is that what I'm hearing?
I would say that the report will, again, share a very comprehensive jurisdictional scan, and then it would provide next steps of how we might, and it might be more than one option, but how we might move forward to implement social procurement, within that umbrella of community benefits in Hamilton. So yes, to your point.
Thank you.
I think we need to move on from this. A couple things.
Just a quick.
Just a moment.
Yeah.
A couple things I want to summarize. Number one is the work of this committee is the Community Benefits Protocol Subcommittee. The job is for us to get a protocol for doing community benefits. And so we can make other kinds of recommendations inside the scope of that to General Issues Committee or whatever, and that's fine. This is obviously going to inform that work. I was always mindful that we don't want to go outside the scope of the committee and the mandate of the committee, which is then actually running pilots from this committee. Like, that's not actually the job of the committee. We can certainly, again, make a kind of recommendation elsewhere and say the organization should take on doing this and then find a way to do that. But that's not the activity. So this work, though, I think that we heard today will inform the protocol itself. So will other things coming forward. And so a sequence of events might look like this. You carry on doing what you're doing. May the gods of the server return the information to you with speed. And then after that report in Q4, you can come back and there can be a bit of a gap analysis done, right? So if you've already mentioned things that have been mentioned here and you can take those recommendations into your report, great. If there's things that were mentioned here that weren't, you can highlight those. You can say, oh, we've already kind of done this. That way it's not like you're being asked to do the same work twice, if that makes sense. And so I think the language around this motion exists already. I'm sure Clerk Gauthier understands exactly what it will be. It's a report back in Q2 2020 about this thing, right? So I'm just wanting to make sure that's where we're going, and then we can vote on it. But if you have something you want to add before we vote, Member Andrews, go ahead.
No, just to add, if there is any opportunity to identify within city departments work that's already being done through ECDev or other areas where they might be complementary to this work. I know that there are certain initiatives in the city of Hamilton that might actually fall under the purview that we're already doing of social procurement and community benefits, if the report can include some of that work as a stepping stone.
Okay, I think that's staff understand that, and they'll do that scan of what's happening elsewhere. I don't think it needs to be part of the formal motion, but I presume it'll be something that's in the report that Brianne was talking about bringing back anyways. Is obviously not just doing a jurisdictional scan outside of Hamilton, but I'm presuming would also know what's happening. I'm seeing nods, so okay. On the motion that's before us, though, all those in favor of that motion, if there's no further discussion. Oh, sorry. We need a seconder. I think the seconder is either Member Andrus or Councillor Maureen Wilson, whichever one you don't have as the mover. Okay, and then Member Andrus. Sure.
I think Councillor Tattison has his hand up.
Okay, Councillor Tattison it is, everyone. In the musical seconders and movers chair, it's moved by Councillor Maureen Wilson, seconded by Councillor Tattison. All those in favor? That's everyone. That motion carries, and we'll move on to the next item in our agenda after, no, we already done that thing, that's good. Okay, communications. So I'm going to have, these are 5.1 and 5.2. May I please have a mover and seconder to put the communications on the floor? Moved by Member Andrews, seconded by Councillor Huang. Any discussion on communications 5.1 and 5.2? I'm not seeing any discussion on the communications themselves. Can we vote to action these things? So if we want to change the action here, this is the moment to change the action from be received to be received and do something. So everyone knows. I see Member Andrus, go ahead.
So with the latitude of the chair, I'd like to have these items both be received and referred to staff for both a report and comment back, setting out a great deal of more work for them, so.
Okay, I presumed that would happen. not a surprise for me. And by the way, it's not the latitude of me. This committee gets to vote on these kinds of things. It's not up to me. But before we do that, I want to turn to staff to ask them when they think they'd be able to report back on these items. And I mean, that discretion is yours. You're the one that knows your schedule. If it's going to take until after Q4 2024, which I imagine it would based on our previous motion, then it will. But I want to kind of give you that window as best you can.
Through the chair. At the risk of self-deprecating here, can you please explain how this motion would be different from the one that was just approved? Because I'm seeing similarities. So I would really like some clarity, if you don't mind.
Before we go to that, so what you're saying is that you see that these two things could be perhaps also reported back on with respect to the previous item?
Through the chair, I'm saying this is the same unless they're different. I understand we got two different reports, and one report was presented on today, but it was my understanding that both were being referred back to staff, unless I have that incorrect.
Yeah, and I was just making sure that we did this discreetly and differently than trying to lump them all together in one moment, because that's not how the agenda was structured. But if this is really more, you're seeing this as part and parcel of the same work. I'll turn to the clerk for a moment, though.
Perhaps we could just refer to staff for appropriate action, and then if it's tied together, then it would just be staff's discretion of what they do with that.
I'll turn to Member Andrews, who's suggesting this.
Yeah, I think they're complementary work, so I agree. I just wanted to formally make sure that they weren't just being received, but recommended to staff. So, okay, sounds good. I think we understand where we're at, which is that they'll be received and referred to you for appropriate action. And of course, if you can incorporate that stuff in the Q4 2024 report, great. Some things obviously may not overlap. And if we end up at a place at the end where we feel like there's something missing, right, we can also make a motion at that time. Director Yako?
Through the chair, I believe Marianne's report can come earlier than Q4, so long as everything. Yeah, we get some help there. So perhaps Brianne's report can come back before Q4 at some point in time, and then we'll have more clarity. Certainly, if these reports come back to staff for comment. Perhaps after the next report when Brianne comes, and if at the will of this committee they want to focus in on a particular item or a specific direction to staff, then we can take that under advisement. But we can try to come back with a report in response to the two presentations by Q4. And then if you want to further refine that before Q4, we can do that as well.
Sounds good. I think everybody understands. So they'll be received and sent to staff for appropriate action. And we don't need a mover and seconder for that because it's a communication item. So we're just all going to look at me, everyone, and nod. Everyone's fine with that? Cool. So that's going to happen. And now there being no further discussion on the communication items, can we have a mover and seconder on them as amended? Did we already have a mover and seconder for the communication items? Put them on the floor? We did, pardon me. So we're just going to have a vote now on the communication items themselves. All in favor? Everyone's in favor. Love to communicate. We're on to